over the past several weeks, we have spent a lot of time learning how to build and deploy a full-fledged REST API server by mastering technologies like the Express framework and a NoSQL database like MongoDB. This approach gives you full control over how you build and deploy your backend server. But in many situations, we may have very little time to configure a server and then deploy it quickly. So, for example, you are a startup that needs to reach the market very, very quickly. Then you may want to quickly scaffold out a backend server together with a front-end application and reach the market very, very quickly. In those circumstances, can we provide the backend support in the form of a service that can be quickly configured and deployed? That is exactly what we will discuss in more detail in this lecture and the subsequent exercises in this lesson and the following lesson. So as we have learned in this course, we have mastered the technologies, the frameworks necessary for us to build a full-fledged backend REST API server. Now, of course, as we have learned over the past several weeks, this approach requires us to set up our own server and then configure the server. We need to set up our backend database and then configure the various aspects of the backend database. We need to develop the REST API and the various routes for our REST API. And also, we may need to build in additional services like delivering push notifications to the user, user management, social networking services, and so on. So all these mean that developing a full-fledged backend requires a lot of effort. Now, can we package this whole approach into a service that can be quickly configured and deployed without having to spend so much time configuring our server? Now, you're looking at me strangely and saying, you spent the past 3 weeks training us in all these technologies, and now you're saying that it is very easy to configure a server using a backend as a service to provide all these various features from our backend. Well, every approach comes with its own advantages and disadvantages. Let's learn a little bit more about backend as a service before we decide whether the full-fledged server development approach that we have learned so far is the right way for us, or quickly configuring and deploying backend as a service is the approach that will satisfy our needs. So what exactly is backend as a service? The backend as a service is designed as a model for providing mobile and web developers to link their applications to the backend cloud. So typically the backend as a service is hosted in the cloud, and then you expose the backend to the front end through a well-designed interface like the REST API endpoints. A fully packaged backend, as we see in this lesson, is a relatively recent phenomenon and has been taking the web world by storm. We will look at some examples in a bit more detail. Now, this provides a bridge between the front end and the back end data storage and the backend database management through a unified API. And also, many of these backend as a service providers provide their own software development kit, which will enable you to quickly get started on front-end development. This approach, of course, frees up the developers from having to concentrate on building a backend and instead concentrate on their front-end development or trying to design and deploy the user experience within the front end, be it in the form of an Angular application or be it in the form of a mobile app. Now, if you are familiar with cloud computing, I'm sure you have heard terms like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Now, the mobile backend as a service, or BaaS, is essentially building upon this approach and targeting mobile and web developers with access to backend cloud services and a much more packaged environment. So this is how the backend as a service enables you to leverage the cloud backend for supporting your front-end application. Of course, the next question that arises in your mind is, what does the backend as a service provide for you? Typically, a typical backend as a service provides for you push notifications automatically built into the backend cloud support. It provides you with file storage and sharing of files. It provides you with social network integration. Many of these backend service providers provide social network integration automatically for you. It provides you with messaging and chat capabilities, which you can leverage within your front end to provide better user experience. It also provides you with user management. As we have seen when we built our user management and the authentication support within our Express plus MongoDB server, we had to build in the full-fledged authentication server. We needed to build in the backend services. We needed to do the token management, both on the backend and on the front end, and the authentication of the user, and so on. All this can be packaged and delivered to you as a unit with the software development kit that comes with the backend as a service. And also, backend, since it is a packaged service, they also build in a lot of usage analysis tools which enable you to get a quick overview of how the users are interacting with your backend. So these usage tools give you a lot of insight into the user behavior from within your backend. Also, many of these backend services provide you with a method of building and deploying your own custom logic within the backend to meet your specific requirements. Of course, they provide you with the framework within which you can design your custom business logic to meet your specific needs. So to summarize, a typical backend provides a data storage API for cloud storage where you can upload and download files and also access these files, some kind of a binary storage for your data, perhaps device synchronization and caching capabilities. So for example, when you build your front end, the backend data will be automatically cached in the front end. They may also support offline operation of your front end. So even with your user device disconnected from the network, you may still provide sufficient amount of information to the user with offline capabilities. So both online and offline workflow. So you can even allow the user to perform their activities offline and then later on synchronize with the backend. Third-party integration. So many times, many of these backend as a service providers allow third-party developers to develop plugins that can then be leveraged together with the backend to provide extensions to the services that the backend already provides for you. Secure connectivity between the front-end application and the backend, and also many times automatically generate the REST API endpoints for you based upon the data that you store in the backend. We will see examples of this, especially with loopback, as we will see later on in the exercises. And also, as I mentioned, many of these backend as a service providers provide their own software development kits so that you can easily get started with your front-end development. The SDK comes with all the code necessary for your front-end application to automatically interact with your backend application. So for example, the SDK might already contain services that your Angular application can leverage to talk to the backend automatically. So you may be left only with implementing the components and the front-end templates for your application. All the interaction with the backend is automatically managed by the package SDK that is provided for you. We will see examples of this, both with Firebase that we will look at a little bit later, and also with Loopback that we will discuss in the next lesson. Of course, any approach has two sides to the coin. So let's examine some of the advantages and disadvantages of backend as a service. Now, one advantage, of course, is that with the backend, it provides you pre-built, tried and tested components. So the backend is packaged for you. So the backend service provider would have ensured that the entire backend is well tested and will deliver the service as promised to the users, to the front-end developers. So you don't need to spend additional time having to worry about testing and ensuring that your backend works correctly or not. Unlike when you build your own custom backend using the frameworks that we have seen earlier, you are fully responsible to ensure that your backend works correctly. The second advantage is, of course, the concomitant reduction in the server-side effort that you need to put in. So since the server side comes as a packaged unit, you can concentrate primarily on the front-end development and leave the server side for the backend as a service provider to deal with. And you're simply leveraging the flexibility that they provide for you in developing the front end. And the typical backend as a service provider will take care of integrating any recent technological developments into their backend and provide updated versions of the backend as and when the newer technologies become available. So that way, you as a front-end developer is completely freed up from worrying about how the backend needs to evolve. That is automatically taken care of by the BaaS provider for you. Of course, everything comes with the flip side of the coin. So let's examine what are some of the downsides of going with a backend as a service. First and foremost, most backends operate as a black box. You don't know exactly how the backend is implemented. If you are using an open source backend like Loopback, for example, you do have access to the entire backend code, but still, why would you want to spend time exploring the details of the backend when you have been guaranteed that the backend has been built well and tested well for you? So you can simply treat it as a black box. As long as you have confidence that this black box is going to deliver the services that you expect it to deliver, you can simply use the backend without having to worry about how it is actually implemented. The second aspect is that if you choose to go with one backend as a service provider, there is the issue of vendor locking. So once you choose one of the BaaS providers, you will be locked into their environment and the way they store their data. Many a time, once you adopt one of these backend as a service providers, all your data gets locked into their service, and you may have to go through an inordinate effort in order to retrieve the data that you have already stored in the backend, should you choose to migrate from one backend as a service provider to another. So deploying your service using one backend is a very straightforward task, but then if you choose to change your BaaS provider, that is going to be an uphill battle for you. So that is something that you should be fully aware of before committing to using one of the backend as a service providers. This issue does not become a problem when you are doing your full-fledged backend development on your own. Again, you win some and you lose some. So we always take that with the whole picture in mind. So the loss of flexibility that you entail by using one of the backend as service providers may be something that you're willing to live with because of the fact that you have reduced amount of backend development time and you can concentrate more on delivering your product to the market. So if you trust the BaaS provider, then you can simply go with your selected BaaS provider and then not worry too much about the loss of flexibility that ensues because of that. Again, as I said, not everything comes with only advantages. There are always advantages and disadvantages to any approach that you choose for developing and deploying your backend. BaaS is just one alternative that might be the approach that you choose to for your specific needs. And finally, of course, not every BaaS comes without its own set of additional training requirements. If you need to use one of the BaaS providers, since it is a black box, you need to learn the API, you need to learn how to configure it, you need to learn how to customize parts of it should you choose to do so, and so on. So the training effort that you spent learning specific or generic frameworks like Express and databases like MongoDB, instead you will be spending time learning the specifics of the backend as a service that you choose to use. So it is a question of where you want to spend your time. The additional training will always be involved, except that with a BaaS provider, you might be able to get started more quickly than building your own custom backend. The BaaS market is full of a number of choices, and indeed these choices keep increasing by the day. Now, when you go into the BaaS market, you might see commercial vendors. Here is a small list of commercial vendors. Again, there are more and more that get added by the day to this list, and I have just listed only a small subset of them. Of course, if your favorite BaaS provider is not in this list, don't blame me. Maybe I'm just unaware of them, or maybe they are just too new to the market and so I haven't come across them. But here is a list of some of the commercial vendors that provide BaaS services for us. In particular, I'm going to concentrate on Firebase, which is provided by Google. In this lesson, we'll explore how to make use of Firebase in a little bit detail in this lesson, in the exercises that follow. Now, if you want to go with an open source provider, there are plenty of open source alternatives that are available for us. Of course, there you will be acquiring this open source software and then building your server and then deploying it, except that it'll come as a prepackaged entity that you can quickly configure and deploy to the backend. We will look at Loopback as one of the examples of an open source software that can be deployed very quickly for building your backend. And as I said, more and more choices are coming into the market day by day. So should you explore the market tomorrow to find new BaaS providers, by all means, examine what is provided by them, what kind of services that they provide. Will those services that they provide meet your requirements, and can you quickly leverage the service that they provide to get to the market quickly? So these are issues that I will leave you with. Again, as I said, we should look at all the possible alternatives and then make our own decisions independently. But unless we are aware of the alternatives, we won't be able to make informed choices. So that's why the last few lessons of this course I'm spending on exploring some examples of backend as service providers.